Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 221 here, back in day, talk about Weekly Shonen Jump, issue number 47 of 2024. But this isn't a full episode of the, hey, let's talk about a certain Weekly Shonen Jump issue. This is another mini episode of the series. I sort of came up with this idea last week because I really love talking about Jump and certain series in Jump, but I don't always love talking about every single series that runs in Jump, right? So this week, for instance, we had 14 series that I sat down and read out of Jump, and out of those, I think I'm going to start doing mini episodes on weeks. I think, yes, there are about 6 series that I really want to talk about, but aren't like the end-all, be-all series for the entire episode, right? So last week, as you'll know how I did that mini episode, I focused on 6 series mainly, and then at the very end of it, I sort of just went through, like, in a minute each what happened in each of their series. I think we are just going to be cutting that. I think we are just going to be doing a mini episode as, instead of covering all 14 series, we are just going to be covering 6 of however many of those series I read. And I think there still were a lot of good series this week, but these were the 6 that I thought were truly the best. But yeah, I'm ready for a fun recording today. Hopefully this one doesn't go on for too long, because I do have a college class that starts in an hour, and it's about a 15-minute walk, so I've only got about 45 minutes to do this. So if this video is over 45 minutes, it means I'm recording the later half of this video tomorrow, which I don't know if I quite want to do, but whatever. I finished reading the newest Chainsaw Man chapter right before I started recording this. I think it was like 183 or something like that. Either way, I'm just super hyped to talk about manga. I would love to talk about like Chainsaw Man and some of those other series that I read like that I don't really have a place to put them in, because like I don't know if I can do a video series talking about Chainsaw Man every week, because what I love to do, I think Chainsaw Man is a very excellent series. I do. But what am I going to do for the weeks where it's like the Chainsaw Man chapters that have nothing going on in them besides for Denji having something going on with his lower half and Asa helping him out, right? I don't know how I would tackle all of those chapters on a frequent basis. I'm thankful that none of the other series I talked about normally do that. But yeah, I'm going to grab a quick drink here real fast, and then we'll hop into the first chapter I want to talk about, of course, of these 6 chapters here, and that is One Piece chapter number 130, titled The Accursed Prince. So this chapter of One Piece starts off in a way that a lot of chapters normally start off, with the cover page story going on. We're currently on Ogre Child Yamato's Golden Harvest Surrogate Pilgrimage, Volume 17. The sword got stolen during nap time, and we see Yamato is sleeping somewhere, and we see that Otama is pretty much sleeping with Yamato. And we see one of Yamato's swords has been stolen by some mysterious person as Yamato is sort of sleeping on the ground, right? I really love how, like, the snot bubbles are, like, drawn from the nose. Like, yeah, these characters are clearly sleeping, right? But as we hop into the chapter itself, we start off with on the giant ship, the Grey Eric, as we pretty much see Frankie is like telling all of the big giants like Dory Broggy and sort of some of the other ones like, hey guys, listen up, warriors of Elbaf, the search is over, right? And all of the giants are like, what are you talking about? Like, we're out here searching for all of your other Straw Hat members, right? But Frankie pretty much says, like, hey, to make a long story short, we've done a lot of searching, and we know our crewmates are alive, like, they're not going to die that easily, so we'll just try to meet them in Elbaf. We're sure that's where they'll be heading eventually, so if they're not there already, we will find them somewhere in Elbaf. And I love how Brooke also puts up the opinion like, hey guys, here's the thing, we are also completely out of food, so that doesn't really do too well for us, like, making it much further, right? And I love how, I'm pretty sure this one is Dory, how Dory's like, oh, I see then, like, if your crew says so, then let's head back over to Elbaf, and he's like, right guys, let's toast to our safe return, right? And one of the other giants is like, come on, man, we are out of food, like, can you believe that? But we now cut back over to the original 6 Straw Hats, who are currently outside of the castle, or the diorama mini thing, and we see this was inside a massive castle, right? As we see Luffy and all the other Straw Hats have broken out of the wall, and they're like, wow, this place is so huge, right? And then they sort of look around and they see a tree that's beside them, which is so much taller than everything else around them. They're like, man, I wonder how old this tree is. And we see that they're on this snowy mountain, And we see there's sort of this bigger tree in the background that sort of like has multiple tiers to it, it seems. We will get more on that by the end of the chapter. But we see all the Straw Hats are sort of just like out here checking out what's going on. They're like, man, is everything really like this? Like, it's so big. Like, is that a mountain over there? It's so huge. It's freezing up here. As we see, it's just they're in the middle of almost a snowstorm of some kind, right? And then they look over and they see this massive suspension bridge, right? And Nami's like, man, that's so crazy. I almost get dizzy looking at that thing, right? And eventually, as they're looking, Usopp notices coming down the bridge, like, guys, hide! There are giants coming down the bridge. As we now cut to who those two giants are, I don't know if we've met both of these two characters before. I may think that we have, but I'm not 100% sure. Either way, we either meet for the first time or get reintroduced to Goldberg and Gerd, who Goldberg is the new giant pirate's cook, and Gerd is the new giant pirate's doctor, right? The new giant pirates, as I've had to do some research on lately, because I did not remember really anything about the whole giant things, are the people who are part of Luffy's Straw Hat Grand Fleet. And that was who the guy last time who ended up being this fake sun god, he was, again, one of the giants on that crew, pretty much, right? We pretty much see that Gerd is just like, hey, why did Harjin have to bring that weirdo onto the crew? And Goldberg is like, hey, well, that's because he's a decent enough navigator. But he says this in, like, the whole way of, like, well, that's because he's a good navigator. As, like, that sort of, like, role of, like, oh, yeah, this guy's smart, but he talks a little stupidly sort of thing, right? And Gerd just says, like, hey, well, I hate him. Loki's not the shame of Elbaf. It's him. And Goldberg's like, and he's like, and Goldberg's like, hey, that's going to only make Roto happier, right? Obviously, Roto isn't well liked in the giant community, and I think for a very, very obvious reason, right? But Gerd pretty much says, like, hey, you saw it, didn't you, Piper? His crow was carrying a little boat in its mouth, right? And Goldberg pretty much says, like, hey, the intruders have to be caught, of course, but Roto created his own intruders there, talking about Straw Hats, so sort of like that. We see all of these Straw Hats are sort of hiding behind a corner of the building while all of these giants sort of walk by here. And pretty much Usopp's like, man, did you hear that? They said that we're in Elbaf. Like, this means we've got to be here. We have finally made it to Elbaf, which is sort of like Usopp's whole dream. So it sort of makes sense that he's really, really happy about this. Sanji sees that Gerd's a woman and is like, oh man, who knew giant women could be so beautiful? So it's like, Sanji, are you really trying to do that? And of course, seeing these people walk by, Luffy yells out, hey guys, we're right here! And both Gerd and Goldberg turn down to look towards that and are like, huh, did I imagine something over there? And Gerd's like, yeah, I think so. So they start to walk into the castle and they come in to ask Roto if he's in for today. Right? As this happens, we didn't see the Straw Hats are now crossing the big suspension bridge. Pretty much it's giant size, so everybody is like, oh man, like this is, if we fall down this, we are just going to die. I don't quite know about that, right? And as all of this is happening, we see that Luffy is walking up on the top of the rope, sort of scoping out the general area. And pretty much eventually Luffy's like, hey, can you guys feel that too? Something is tingling, right? And Zoro's like, well, I mean, we could all feel it, but we're not particularly going. Like, Sanji's like, yeah, well, I'm not going to see it. And Zoro's like, then I'll. But Sanji is sort of pulling back like, dude, you are just going to get lost. This is maybe the biggest forest in the entire world. We're not letting you do this, Zoro. Because, of course, Zoro does not know his directions, right? But eventually, Luffy's just like, hey, it's whenever I hear roaring back into Block Kingdom, I think, right? And he pretty much says, like, hey, you guys keep going across the bridge, as Luffy just jumps off this suspension bridge into the massive forest down below. And all of the Straw Hats are just like, Luffy, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing here? Like, why did you jump down here, right? But as Luffy jumps off the bridge here, we then cut back over to the Great Eric, where all of the giants and the other 4 Straw Hats are all sort of on the ship, right? It seems like they're reading the newspaper of the next day, and they're like, and the giants are like, what? The newspaper said we attacked Egghead? Like, why would they lie about us like this, right? And then, of course, because the newspaper is so small for Dory and Broggy to read, Robin has to sort of read out the newspaper to them, and we see inside of the newspaper, we see that Dory and Broggy have wanted posters again, right? They have bounties now, right? And we see that they're both at 1.8 billion, and they're both like, well, I guess we're back in action now because the government sort of said we are in action because of that, right? And they sort of like talk about all of this, right? And Robin pretty much says like, hey, I mean, of course, like you guys have a much higher bounty right now, because another one of the Giants points out like, hey, you were each at 100 million back in a day, and now it's a massive jump, right? But Robin just explains like, hey, that was 100 years ago, and we're talking now about 100 years later. Inflation exists in the One Piece universe too, like, don't get that twisted, right? And he says, like, hey, this seems appropriate for an Elbaf chief captain now, right? And then it also says in a newspaper that Luffy was the one who murdered Vegapunk. And I love how Frankie's like, hey, another masterclass in lies and distortions. And I absolutely love how Lilith, who is still here, is like, haha, so Luffy killed me, didn't he, right? And I love how Frankie's like, shut up, you know he was trying to protect you until the end, right? But as you're looking at all of this, you're looking at the picture that they got of Luffy, right? And Brooke's like, hey, do we know when this picture was taken of Luffy to begin with, right? And Jinbei says, like, hey, it was probably at some point during Egghead. Like, I'm sure the World Economic Journal had somebody there who was taking pictures acting like a Marine or something, right? Or they'll also pay good money for just standard photographs, right? And Robin points out, like, hey, when Luffy turns into his free form, does the mark appear on his right arm? As we see on Luffy's arm, or maybe not, it's not his right arm, it is his left arm, maybe. No, I think it is his right. No, it's definitely his left. I'm sorry, sometimes I do not know arm directions in manga. But we see that there's an X on his arm, very reminiscent to the X that they gave Vivi all the way back there in the day, right? As all of this pretty much goes down to like, hey, does he normally always have that marked out? Like, normally he's moving around so much, I've never gotten a good look at it, right? And like, it seems very unnatural to me. Like, his hand is blurred, but the mark is crystal clear. So like, hey, that's a little bit of a strange detail to focus on, right? As they're all going on over this, and I normally don't get into much theory crafting when it comes to One Piece, and I am a few chapters behind on One Piece, so if this has been revealed, I'm going to look like a massive idiot, but there's either two reasons that this may be here. Either it is Luffy sending a message to Vivi or somebody else of that sort, or it is Vivi, who is currently with Morgan on the World Economic Journal, who has sort of added this mark in post to sort of try to talk to the Straw Hats at the same time, right? I'm sure this is a theory that's come out a lot. I personally don't watch much into One Piece theories and all of that. Like, I watch the Tekking 101 chapter reviews whenever the new chapter comes out, but because I'm so far behind, I haven't even been watching those recently. So, but that's sort of what I think about this mark on Luffy's arm is like, oh, does it have something to do with either Vivi contacting the Straw Hats or Luffy trying to contact Vivi or the other Straw Hats? It's just a very interesting mark to sort of focus on, and it really gets focused on for a good portion of this chapter, right? But eventually, as all of this sort of keeps going on, right, they eventually start talking, and we see that Broggy says, like, hey, it's amazing to think that Straw Hats considered equals with Red Hair Shanks now, right? Broggy says, like, hey, we had this youngster named Harjin on our crew, and I hear he's your follower now, right? Of course, being that he is the part of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. That's what I was trying to get across there. One of the other giants was like, hey, he was the son of a king too. You know, it was a real Tempest brat, though. Pretty much explained, like, hey, they wanted to come and get us too, but in the end, it was only us old-timers who were able to get to Egghead, right? And he says it's a bit because of the trouble back in Elbaf, right? All the Straw Hats are like, trouble? What's going on? As the Giants pretty much explain, like, hey, it happened while the captains were away. You see, in Elbaf, the king has another official child known as the Accursed Prince. He committed all manner of evil acts and was sentenced to crucifixion a few years back, but nearly escaped his punishment. It took all of our warriors to get him under control. And Frankie's like, hey, like, all of the warriors of Elbaf together? That seems insane, right? But eventually he says, like, the giant just says, like, hey, his desperate desire for a legendary devil fruit passed down through the royal line of Elbaf led him to kill his father, King Harold, and eat the devil fruit. The next time that Loki, the accursed prince, is unleashed, the world will be brought to ruin. He is the shame of Elbaf. As we now cut to where Luffy has finally found this sense that he was, this sense of hockey that he was sort of sensing earlier on the bridge, right? And he walks up to this massive giant, and this giant says, "Name yourself." And Luffy says, "Oh, hey, I'm Luffy, the man who'll become king of the pirates," doing his whole typical thing. And this guy here just says, like, "King, okay." And Luffy says, like, "Hey, where am I and who are you? Do you mind me asking?" And this giant just says, "Hey, this is the Warland Elbaf, the kingdom of warriors, the most powerful nation in the world, which once lived and breathed warfare. I am the sun god who brings the world to an end. Loki." As we get not only this proclamation of, all right, this is Loki, this is who they were just talking about, the accursed prince of Elbaf, but also we see Elbaf itself, which is just a massive, massive tree with multiple layers of it's a big ass tree with multiple layers of leaves and branches sort of sprouting out, making different layers of this tree. It is absolutely so incredibly cool. This was an awesome chapter of One Piece. Sorry if my review was a little disgruntled in a way. One Piece can sometimes be very hard to talk about, and it's the reason I don't really talk about One Piece too much, but this was just too great of a chapter not to talk about. Understanding more about Elbaf and learning more about Loki, this guy who is the accursed prince. It's honestly so awesome, right? Next up is Ruri Dragon, chapter number 23. This chapter is titled, "I'm a Dragon," right? Of course, last time we had the whole idea in Ruri Dragon of, hey guys, Ruri is going to change the weather with her draconic abilities, pretty much. And pretty much we learned, like, Mr. Takamoto and all of her classmates were really whirling and wanting Ruri to go and change the weather, also the school festival could happen on time due to this typhoon, right? Well, this chapter opens up with, of course, Ruri at home. She's brushing her teeth in the morning after that whole confrontation last chapter. And she's like, okay, my horns grow back in overnight. As we see, there are now 2 new horns coming out of Ruri's head. And she pretty much just thinks like, hey, I guess dragons heal up like it's nobody's business. And also, my hair is getting pretty long, too. Ruri goes out to talk with her mother this morning, and she's like, hey, good morning, Mom. And Ruri's mother's like, hey, good morning, we have toast on the menu today, right? And the two of them pretty much go through and talk about Ruri's horns and everything going on, like, hey, they popped out just like it was nothing, right? And eventually, her mother just says, like, hey, this is the perfect weather, wouldn't you say? As we look outside and see that it is just a perfect downpour going on, right? As Ruri just thinks to herself, hey, I'm going to call lightning today. As we now cut inside of Ruri's school, we understand that this is a Sunday when this is going on, and we see that Ruri is at her desk, and that electrostatic discharge is really just going on around Ruri. As we see, there's a little bit of lightning, like, crackling off her body, right? As a bunch of her, like, classmates are like, oh man, look at that, like, it's all leaking out again. Like, you must have stored up plenty for today, haven't you, Ruri, right? Like, are you going to be okay? Like, do you think you can actually go and pull this whole thing off, right? We see Ruri's friend Yuki, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's Yuki. I'm not going to look it up, though, because I do not have time. Yuki's pretty much just like, hey, the typhoon is hitting way sooner than the forecast initially said. Maybe this is your weather control thing in action, right? And if so, I mean, this will probably work today, right? And Ruri just then asked, like, hey, why did all of you guys show up to class today anyway? Like, hey, it's Sunday and there's a storm coming. Why not stay, like, out at home, but also be safe, right? And I love her classmates, like, are you serious? We want to see you call lightning and be a badass and control the weather. Like, we just think that's awesome. As we now cut to some gray manga panels in manga, which pretty much means, like, hey, the flashback within a flashback, or in this, it sort of means revisiting after a flashback we've already seen, right? More manga needs to use gray panels, and that is just my strict opinion, right? pretty much we see pretty much what the plan is going on, as Mr. Takamoto just says like, hey, let's go and talk through the plan. The sports festival is in 5 days from now, plus a weekend in between. And before that, Akoi could accelerate the typhoon's arrival with her special powers, right? And everybody's like, is that really possible? Can she even do that? And Takamoto's like, it probably is. The electrostatic discharge part is a part of her overall ability to call lightning, you guys understand? So she's definitely packing that particular power for sure. Ryu can amass clouds to create lightning. Proper use of that handy talent can draw the whole typhoon here way sooner than expected. So the plan is for Akoi to drum up all of that lightning, right? And everybody again's like, hey, but even if she can do it, is it really safe and alright for her to do this whole thing, right? And Takamoto just says like, hey, of course it is. Based on accounts of how this will affect the weather and climate, the weather manipulation should take up to 3 days. In the meantime, the action committee will help us plan for the storm and carry out the operation over the weekend, right? Some of Ruru's classmates just sort of talk to her like, hey, are you doing all right here, right? And eventually Takamoto just says like, hey, if you're sure you're going to be okay, we just have to be mindful of the burden it places on Akoi herself. First, she needs to grow her horns back in. Horns are apparently central to a Ryu's power. Then she needs to build up enough energy of electricity to be able to create lightning in the first place. So this actually works out perfectly. After Ruri uses this power, which typically has no other outlet, it'll enter a cooldown period, right? Which pretty much is explaining like, hey, all right, Ruri is going to be getting all of her lightning together. She's going to be summoning it to herself. But then after she uses this big blast, she won't be able to use it for a while. That will also mean she will be sort of free of this particular draconic trait for a few days, right? So it's very interesting. We then go and cut to what I'm either expecting to be the principal of the school they go to, or just to a regular doctor or somebody. As we see that Ruri's here for mom, talking to a professional of some kind. This professional just says like, I mean, yeah, I think it should be fine. Like, I don't foresee any issues with any of this. Her body should be ready to withstand lightning in such high temperatures, since Ruri is a Ryu in human form. Ruri's mom's like, hey, so you're saying that she will probably be fine to call down a bolt of lightning? And this guy just says like, on paper, theoretically, yeah, she'll definitely be able to, but only if you're sure about it. Using this ability will definitely drain you, right? And Ruri says like, hey, yeah, I'm sure. We've got a school event coming up. And this guy's like, what? This is for a school event? Like, I cannot believe this is going on, but I mean, I guess high schoolers should enjoy their youth at the end of the day, so why not? Then we get a little bit of narration just saying like, hey, so the action committee got to work bringing all of the supplies back inside as we prepared for the coming storm, which brings us to now. As we see outside, all of a sudden, some thunder grumbles in the background, and Ruri jumps at this a little bit, and her classmates are like, hey, are you sure that you're actually good with all of this happening here today, right? And like, wait, are you actually scared of thunder, Cole, yet you're about to call down a bolt of lightning, right? And even one of her friends, I think her name's Kashio, says this, like, hey, girl, aren't you going to summon lightning in a hot second? Like, are you really sure about this, right? One of the other friends of the class, being more of an asshole right now, says, like, hey, Dragon, more like a scaredy cat, right? And eventually, one of the other important school, one of the members who is running the school festival action committee says, like, hey, what do you think about this? Have you come too far out of your comfort zone to do this? Like, hey, seriously, none of us would blame you right now for calling it quits. Like, it's way better than anything ending in disaster, right? At this point, Ruri just asks, hey, let me ask a question real quick. What do you guys all really think about me, right? And she's like, hey, I have horns, I breathe fire, and hell, I'm about to go out there and call down lightning. I'm clearly not a normal person. So what do you guys all see me as? Like, please be honest here, right? And all of her classmates give like a different answer, some sort of like, hey, cryptid, classmate, demon, superhuman monster. Yeah, a monster. But during all of this, she says like, hey, but are you guys not scared of me? And everybody says not at all. And seeing this, Ruri just gets a smile on her face as all of a sudden some more lightning starts to summon around her. And she's like, hey, all right, guys, thank you for that. Now it's time for me to go and do my part. As she runs to the roof of the school building, thinking about things that Mr. Takamoto has told her in the past, like, hey, drink lots of water, eat plenty, and rest up. That should help the electricity amass even further. And she just thinks, like, hey, once you build up a considerable charge, your body will start showing shines, and that's how you know you are ready. Discharge everything you've got and call down the lightning. As we now see that Mr. Takamoto is standing on the roof of the building, or at least the door to the roof access point, and we see that the school nurse is also here, right? As Takamoto says, like, hey, Ruri, are you ready for this? And she's like, hey, I definitely am. As she walks off onto the school roof and says, like, whoa, I've never actually been on the roof before. It kind of feels bare bones, but, like, man, there's still some very, very strong winds. And Takamoto just says, like, hey, the lightning itself will strike a nearby lightning rod, so we'll be inside in the meantime, alright? And Ruri's like, okay, sounds good. As she runs out onto the middle of the roof, the rain is pouring down all around her, and she just thinks, thinking of me as a monster, it makes perfect sense to me. In fact, it makes more sense that people might not accept me the way I am. But they all said they're not scared of me. Sure, they may have been sparing my feelings by lying, but that's still enough for me to be brave. Because no matter what, I'm a dragon. As all of a sudden, lightning sparks start to immolate around her body. Her eyes form a little bit of a star inside of them. And all of a sudden, she calls down lightning. She pretty much discharges all of the electromagnetic ability on her body. It reaches up to the sky, and lightning comes down to reach it, and it hits the lightning rod right on top of the school building. Everybody on the inside is like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And then they run outside to sort of see her, and they pretty much pick Ruri up and bring her back inside, as Ruri thinks, hey, dragon trait number? No, wait. This is one of the dragon abilities, weather control. And that is where we end off this absolutely amazing chapter of Ruri Dragon. This was so much fun from start to complete finish. Pretty much seeing all of the flashback of, like, all right, hey, this is how they are planning to have Ruri use her power to be able to call down lightning. And then eventually seeing it come through and work in the end here with Ruri just discharging all of her electrostatic, and then all of a sudden the lightning being called down, and everybody being like, holy crap, that's crazy, that's awesome, it's so awesome. And I also didn't mention, like, the sky sort of seems to clear up right after this lightning hits the ground, which is really, really cool, all things considered, right? Next up is Ichi the Witch, chapter number 7, also known as the 7th Hunt, the Hasame Magic Part 1. We get a color page at the start of this chapter where we see Ichi, Descaras, and Kumagi, who are all on the color page, being like, hey, yes, they are Team Descaras here, right? As we move into the chapter, we sort of just get a little bit of things just saying, like, hey, the story so far written by Descaras, as this is pretty much a little bit of a thing told from Descaras' perspective, like, hey, thanks to quick thinking from Descaras, the greatest, most perfect witch ever, the idiot feral child, also known as Ichi, successfully caught the Raiko magic, also known as Zinazuri. Then, despite some childishness at the association, Ichi was officially accepted as a witch, and so an anti-human magic hater squad was promptly formed under the leadership of none other than the great Descaras. Now, Team Descaras sets out on its first mission, hunting the Hasame magic, right? As from there, we now cut into a wagon of some sort, where we see Kumagi is sitting here, and this chapter really revolves on Kumagi a whole lot, right? And she thinks, like, hello, my name is Kumagi, and I'm a witch cadet of the Mantinal Witches Association, and also a member of the Witches Research Club. Yes, I'm just a research student, but... And at this point, we see that she's sort of looking around this carriage where we see that Ichi is standing here. He's currently sharpening his knife. And we see that Descaras is sitting in the background just doing things. And all of a sudden, we see that Oro sort of reaches over to Kumagi's like, hey, you want to be friends? And Kumagi's just like, why am I even here? We get a little bit of a thing of like, hey, here are Witch Cadet Kumagi's personal belongings. We see she has a notebook, a magic pouch, a backpack, a research club hat, a coat, and a wand, right? And also her mental readiness, which isn't actually there, right? And then we get a little bit of a map of where everybody is going. They are headed from the mountainside village over to the destination, which is a town called Dancewood, right? Discross pretty much asks the group, like, how long until we are there. And Kumagi pretty much just says, like, hey, I believe it'll probably take about another hour or so, right? And pretty much Discross explains, like, hey, the place we are going to is so far out into Styx, it doesn't even have a mirror for Mirage Passage, which we see as the way that witches mainly travel in Ichi the Witch is through, hey, we have these magic mirrors, and through these magic mirrors, we are able to travel back and forth to get from one place really, really easy, right? And Kumagi pretty much says, like, hey, I'm sorry, even the closest registered mirror was almost 20 miles away from our destination, right? And pretty much Discross like, hey, it would have been way easier if we could have flown, but no, we're stuck with baggage that doesn't even know how to use a levitation spell. And Kumagi's like, I am so sorry, but Discross like, hey, I'm not talking about you, Kumagi. I'm talking about this loser over here, pretty much directly pointing out Ichi, right? As Kumagi just thinks to herself like, man, speaking directly to Master Discross is so nerve-wracking. She thinks like, hey, why am I even here on a anti-human magic hater squad? Like, even among magics, the human haters are notorious for being the most deadly. And like, there's no way I can hack it violently with a bloodthirsty squad like this. Like, I am way too scared, right? But she eventually just says like, hey, but where it terrifies me most of all is him. As we suddenly see that Ichi comes over to ask Kumagi about her bag, right? And she, like, completely flips out as Ichi pretty much explains, like, hey, I was just wondering what, your bag was over there, right? And it's like, maybe a, bag. It looks like the stomach of a bird of something, or no, he says, maybe it's something used for holding your bird calls or something like that, right? As Kumagi just thinks like, hey, he's very likely the first male witch in the whole entire world. Something so rare, it's never even been seen before, but like, he's a man, but he can use magic. Like, it's just so out there and disturbing. But what scares me more is what he does. As she thinks about whenever he just goes and shoulder tosses Oro in the previous chapter, and pretty much how him and Oro have this really fun relationship, right? As Kumagi then just explains her bag, it's pretty much a D&D bag of holding, as she's like, hey, it's a magic item with a spell cast on it that makes it fit a lot more things than it actually looks like, right? At this point, she then grabs a cup out of her bag, saying like, hey, it makes it a whole lot easier for being able to carry mundane things like this, right? As she then uses her wand and creates water straight out of the cup, saying the name Water Spring Fourth Potsula, right? She then hands the cup over to Ichi, and Ichi's like, man, it came out of your pen. Is it really drinkable? And she's like, yeah, it is. Ichi drinks it and he's like, man, this is really, really good, right? And Kumagi just thinks like, man, he really isn't all that familiar with magic if he's so impressed by the simple little spell that I just did, right? But eventually Ichi just says like, wow, this is really good, Kumagi. You're amazing. And she's like, huh? What are you talking about? As Ichi just says like, hey, I mean, you can do all kinds of magic and you teach me new things too, and I think that's really, really awesome. As Kumagi's just like, oh, don't flatter me like that, like, hey, that was a beginner spell that any and all cadet learns, like, it's just a magic item, and it's not that amazing at the end of the day, right? And like, hey, compared to everyone else, as we get a little bit of a flashback into Kumagi's past, as we see that she's around her royal family, or around her family of some sorts, and they pretty much just tell her like, oh no, you couldn't do it, Kumagi. Like, yes, you would not be suited for it. It's alright, you don't have to do a thing. Yeah, you're so useless. As it sort of seems that Kumagi just gets left out of a lot of these situations because she's just not as good as magic and doesn't have the aptitude for it that a lot of other people do, right? As we now cut back to the present where Kumagi just says like, hey, I'm not really that awesome. Like, I can't really do all I can to manage the little things, right? And Ichi then just says like, hey, I once heard a story, a blacksmith told it to me. He said no matter how exquisite the blade, if you don't take proper care of it, you won't even be able to cut a block of jelly with it. But on the other hand, even the poorest of swords, taken care of and given a proper edge, can slice through boulders. Basically, the worth of a tool really depends on how it is used. As Ichi just is like, hey, I was thirsty and you gave me water, and that made me happy at the end of the day. You were nice, so I wanted to thank you, and that's really why I did it. What I meant was, you're just an amazing person. And he says like, hey, Descross isn't though, as he's just sort of starting to get a little bit of a joke. It's like, hey, she always just keeps everything to herself, and like she acts smug about everything too. Like she's such a jerk, pretty much explaining like, hey, it is what it is there, right? And we see that Kumagi is really happy to get these praise from Ichi. She's just thinking like, oh, I guess he really isn't as scary as I thought, right? We now see that Uro, being the agent of chaos, goes over to Descross, is like, hey, feeling left out, you gonna join all of them? We see that Descross, in a joke, sort of comes over and joins all of them, and her and Kumagi get into a little bit of a tumble, right? But as all of this happens, Ichi suddenly senses something out in the distance, right? And he's like, hey, I heard something out there. And or is like, hey, are you sure it wasn't just the wind or something? And Ichi just is like, hey, did I imagine it? As all of a sudden, we see a little young girl running away from 3 ice sharks, as she just yelling out, help, help, please, help. As all of a sudden, we sort of see moments of her past where her parents told her to run away, like, hey, surely somebody will come to help you, the witches will definitely come, as we see there again completely frozen over by, of course, the ice shark, the Hasume magic, as this little girl's just running away, and she's just like, Lady Witch, please, as we see Ichi comes by, uses Inazuri, and takes out these 3 ice sharks, as we see that Kumagi and Descross come over and are able to help this little girl at the last second, right? As this little girl just says like, oh, you came, Witch Lady, right? And Ichi just says like, I mean, I guess, but that lady stuff doesn't really sound right. Like, I am a boy after all. Like, titles aren't my thing, but I'm just a witch. I'm Ichi the Witch. As he says like, hey, boy, this is one weird shark, right? As he starts to just go through all of the various things about the magic and what's with the shark. But most importantly, we get the title drop of the series, which is like, as far as the title drop goes, this one is pretty good, right? Like, we know One Piece's title drop, Ruri Dragon's title drop is a little bit of a more nebulous one, being just like, all right, this girl's Ruri and she is a dragon, we don't really get one. And as we'll sort of get into later, like, I think the only other series that has like one of these like true title drops is the last one we were going to be talking about today, but this was such a fun chapter, sort of seeing this side of Ichi's, like, hey, I'm Ichi and I'm Ichi the Witch, as all of these sharks are blowing up behind him after the use that he used Inazuri with. It's just a really cool moment, and also learning a little bit more about Kumagi and what makes her as a character is just something that I really like at the end of the day. But with that, I definitely do not have time to go through these other 3 chapters. I think I rambled on a bit too long, so I will catch you guys. Probably the rest of this video will be recorded tomorrow. I don't think I'll have time tonight, but I've got to go to my astronomy class now, so it won't matter. You guys will hear me in like 5 seconds after this segment ends, but yeah, I'll see you guys then. Alright everybody, we are now back. It has not actually been 1 day since that last section that you just heard me record. It has actually been 3 days between these 2 recordings of this one video here. That is mostly because my video recording schedule didn't quite go as long as I planned. Just a little bit of like a background. I have about a 2-hour period on every weekday where I am able to record videos, and I have no great time on the weekend whenever I'm able to sit down and record videos, right? So the first section of this video is actually recorded on Thursday, or no, it was recorded on Tuesday. What was that? It was, today's the 15th, so it would have been not the 14th, not 13th, but the 12th. The last portion was recorded on November 12th of 2024, and then, of course, I was planning to record it on the Wednesday after my Oshinoko chapter review, being, of course, the final Oshinoko chapter came out, right? Well, that didn't really go quite the way I planned it to, being that my roommate, instead of giving me 2 hours to record, he just gave me 1 hour to record, so I was only able to get that Oshinoko review done, and not have much else time to record the rest of this Weekly Shonen, just mini Weekly Shonen Jump videos, I have been dubbing it. And then Thursday, I pretty much just took a nap at a time that I was allowed, because allowed to record videos, because I was just very, very tired. So here we are on the 15th of November of 2024. It is currently a Friday, and yeah, it's finally time for me to continue on this video to talk about manga so I can finally read more Weekly Shonen Jump, right? It's pretty neat. I mean, I think the last time, whenever I recorded the first portion of this video, I was not caught up on Hunter x Hunter yet, but now I have reread the entire Succession arc, so I am now caught back up, or I was caught up, I just now remember the entire context for everything that's been going on in Hunter x Hunter. So maybe in the next one of these, we'll talk about a Hunter x Hunter chapter. Who really knows? But to get back into what we were doing, I think we just finished off with the Ichi the Witch section, which means next up is the Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi section. This is, of course, chapter number 17, titled Grand Cross. Really, as far as I did ranking all the chapters, as we'll, of course, go through at the end of the video, Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi was actually on the bottom of my list. It was like 4 from the bottom, so I think, what is that, 12th overall. So I didn't really enjoy this chapter like the fullest extent, but I really do enjoy this chapter for what it sort of does for Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi. It's sort of the wrap-up chapter of this big, more massive, sorry if I could talk, Grand Cross test that we just had in Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi, right? Pretty much last time Kiyoshi had punched the crap out of Yana, or old man Yana, right? And Kiyoshi pretty much starts off the chapter saying, like, hey, if a Grand Cross is decided by talent, then I want no part of it. And everybody else is just like, oh my gosh, what in the world did Kiyoshi just do, right? We see Sosuke like, haha, that's pretty good right there, right? And then pretty much one of the other people from the Concordia Knights Guild just says, like, hey, and why exactly do you look so happy about this, Sosuke, right? And Sosuke pretty much does that whole thing like, but Baka, what do you mean? Like, I'm not happy. Why would you say I'm happy? Because I'm really not here, right? We see one of the other Grand Crosses who are doing the training is, of course, Yoko Ono. And she pretty much just says, like, hey, he's just as strong as we've all heard. No, he's even stronger than the rumors have said. And then she looks over to where the other proctor, I guess is what we'll call him. His name was Shooten. He was the one who trained Sosuke, or who tested Sosuke. And she just is like, hey, Shooten, your bloodlust is showing, right? And Shooten just says, like, hey, I'd kill to go one-on-one with him. He's the real deal. A monster in man's clothing, right? We now cut over to Kiyoshi's perspective, where, of course, he's just punched the crap out of Yana, and he's just like, oh no, like, I really screwed up. And he's just thinking, like, hey, I almost kind of lost it and stopped thinking about what was really going on here. But after he started bad-mouthing Mr. Tosaka, I went and tried to act all tough with, like, I want no part of this sort of thing. But, like, how is any of that going to actually help Tosaka, right? And he's like, plus, there's everybody at the Gates of Hell restaurant. Like, you were all rooting for me, but, like, I obviously haven't passed this test. Like, I failed, didn't I, right? But as Kiyoshi sort of thinking all of this, Sosuke then just speaks up like, hey, everybody, so Kiyoshi passes, right? And he's like, hey, he beat him up, so he passes. I mean, that were the rules that you laid out there, right? And we see the, I guess, like, headmaster of the church, the guy with the crossed shape, like, hair, like, the hair and then, like, the beard and the size of a cross, pretty much just thinks like, what do you two think? Looking over to, of course, Shooten and Yoko. And Shooten just is like, yeah, I mean, I think this is, like, a totally fine method, of course. Like, I mean, it's true. I did agree to it, so beating us up means I think you would pass in the very end, right? But then Shooten suddenly appears almost right in front of Kiyoshi and just says, like, hey, but if we need to, I'd be happy to retest him right here, right now, right? And he says, hey, so are you up for it, Kiyoshi, right? But Kiyoshi just like, oh my gosh, he's so nice. He's giving me another chance to pass his test. But Yoko just comes over and says, like, sort of pulls Shooten away to saying, like, yeah, I think he passes. Like, old man Yana's personal baggage caused him to act very unreasonably. So pretty much everybody's sort of, like, lobbying towards the headmaster. And the headmaster's just, like, thinking, like, sort of stroking his beard all of a sudden, right? As suddenly Tosaka stands up and she's like, I'm asking you to do it. Please rescind Kiyoshi's failure, right? As he gets up from the ground, but immediately gets back on it, as he gets on his knees and sort of, like, bows to the headmaster, just says, like, hey, I'm begging you. Kiyoshi cannot suffer a setback like this now. Kiyoshi Harai is a man carrying the future of all exorcists on his shoulders. If you have to, you can bar me from ever taking the Grand Cross test again. Just pass Kiyoshi. Right? And the headmaster says, like, hey, are you really sure about that, Tosaka? And Tosaka pretty much, like, just confirms this again, like, hey, I'm not so pathetic that I joke about something like that. And Kiyoshi starts to well up a few tears in his eyes, just hearing this heartfelt message that Tosaka is giving to him, right? As the headmaster eventually just thinks, like, hey, in that case, the Exorcists who passed the Grand Cross today, this time, are Sosuke Hitsurugi, Mako Kurosaki, or Kusakari, my bad. Kurosaki is Ichigo's family name from Bleach. Kusakari, Ginsan Tetsuyamiya, Jinta Kantatsuchi, and Kiyoshi Hirai. At this moment, you five are hereby Grand Crosses, right? Look at that, it's a very big deal with all of this going on, and Kiyoshi goes over to Tosaka and just says, like, hey, thank you so much, right? But the headmaster just says, like, hey, as for you, Tosaka, you were close. I have high hopes for next year, right? With that, we cut outside of the church itself, as we see that Tosaka and Kiyoshi sort of sitting outside of it, right? And they're sort of just, like, bantering about everything going on here, right? And Kiyoshi eventually asks, like, hey, Tosaka, are you going back to Dandelion Town, presumably where he's from, right? And Tosaka just is like, hey, well, about that, before he can say anything, Shooten appears and just is like, hey, hey, Tosaka, let's go pay a visit to your new team, right? As pretty much we get a little bit of an explanation, like, hey, Shooten heard my story, and he's letting me work with the Special Forces as an apprentice, so I'll do that while heading up the office in Dandelion Town also, right? And he pretty much says, like, hey, on the one condition that if I fail next year's Grand Cross test, I'll lose my job, right? And Kiyoshi's like, oh, that's so cool, like, Shooten is so awesome, right? Sosuke then just appears by and just says, like, hey, that was pretty impressive, Tosaka, like, you looked really awesome there. I'll be waiting for you at the top, right? And Tosaka's like, yeah, I'll be ready for it, right? Kiyoshi then has a small moment with Shooten and all of the other people, or not Shooten, Sosuke and all the other people of the Concordia Knights, as they're just sort of all talking back and forth to me. We then get a little bit of a note that Mako knows Akari from the Gates of Hell restaurant. Not really an important sort of detail, but it's a little bit of something right there. And then eventually it gets brought to the attention that Kiyoshi is not on the best side of Mr. Tsurugi right now, right? And we even see it, Tosaka's like, you picked a fight with Mr. Tsurugi, right? And Kiyoshi's like, yeah, it wasn't my finest moment, but it is sort of what happened there, right? Well, eventually as this happens, Tosaka just leaves, says like, hey, Hirai, thanks for everything. And Kiyoshi's like, hey, I didn't really do anything though. But Tosaka just says like, hey, next time we meet, I'll be a Grand Cross, and you'll be a Cross Paladin, right? And Tosaka just says, hey, it's a promise. And Kiyoshi just like, alright, sounds good. And they both have a nice firm handshake. As we cut over the scene again to Naraku City, where of course we see Akari is facing off against a exorcised demon of some sort, right? She is pretty much being very, very overwhelmed, and we see that Nihon and Jack Joe are for some reason around here, right? And as everything's just looking bad and really messed up, Kiyoshi comes in to save the day. He kills this demon, exorcises it almost instantly, just as like, hey guys, I'm back. And they're like, oh, Kiyoshi, it's so awesome, you saved us, thank you, right? Like, we've really missed you this past week. And everybody's like, so how'd the test go? And Kiyoshi just says like, hey, well, look at this. And he holds up like an ID card where it says that he is now a Grand Cross, right? And everybody's like, oh, this is awesome, let's go back and celebrate. And at the very end of the chapter, we sort of just get a little bit of narration going on, just like, hey, and so the current close on Kiyoshi Hirai's Grand Cross test. As we now cut to the Demon Realm, as we look inside of Mr. Yamada's house, of course, the demon from the first chapter, as we see that they're all in the house that he's eating with his family, and all of a sudden, on the television, there's a little bit of a thing, like, hey, next to the news, great news, yes. As all of a sudden, we see what this news is. Coming from the Demon Lord publication, Surface Expedition decided, and these are the main targets. And on it, we see Kiyoshi's face as Mr. Yamada's like, Kiyoshi? Oh no! And that is where we end off this chapter of Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi. I really decently enjoyed this chapter. Like, I may need to switch up my rankings and put it higher up, because I don't think this was, like, the best chapter, but I really like what this is sort of going forward for Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi, of the whole deal of, like, hey, everything got resolved at the end of the day, not everybody passed who he wanted to pass, but that's how these sort of tests go. It doesn't always go the way that you envision it from the very beginning, right? A very nice little message, all things considered, and one that I really like, right? But with that, let's move on. We have 2 chapters left, so let's talk about Akane-banashi, chapter number 31. This chapter is titled Dismantled, of course, because the main school, the Shiguma school, has now been dismantled. We start off the chapter with Mikeru going and talking to Master Ikin, as Ikin just says, like, oh, you're not quite the visitor I expected to see today. As he's just like, well, whenever I heard that Master Shiguma collapsed, But Mikeru just says, like, hey, it's fine. We don't need to go into all those formalities. Like, what do you mean you're dismantling the Shiguma school? And Ikin gives a little bit of a glare to Mikeru and just says, like, hey, senior leadership values your school quite highly. And personally, I have seen a number of your performances. And I have to admit, I was very impressed. Offering support during his hospital stay is something anyone can do, and will be easily encouraged on our end. We want you all to focus on your craft instead. So Mikeru's like, and to do that, you're dismantling the Shiguma school? And Ikin just says, like, hey, well, there's no one to look after the Futatsume and below. And Mikeru's like, that doesn't matter. I will look after them, right? But Ikin just says, like, hey, you just graduated to Shinuchi. That is the starting line. You have bigger problems to deal with. As Mikeru just says, being an apprentice means having a parent-child relationship with your master. And how can I call myself a son if I do not support my father figure? As Ikin reaches down to his back pocket, grabs a cigarette, and starts to light it in his mouth, as he just says, oh, I mean, I'll admit that the decision we're making is a rather heartless one, but it is the logical decision. I know you can see this, Mikeru. The Shiguma school will be dismantled, and the 4 apprentices will be taken in by other guardians. You can feel the tension between Mikeru and Ikin in this moment. It's done just very, very well, all things considered. But to get into some even more tension, we now cut back over to the hospital room, of course, Shiguma's hospital room, where Akane just walked in and saw that Isho Arakawa was standing in the room, and Isho pretty much just says, like, hey, your guardian is me. You will be under the care of Isho Arakawa, right? And Akane's world is just sort of being turned upside down in this instant, as she just thinks about everything that the Shiguma school has meant to her, and she just says, why, what? But as eventually she just starts to, like, say this, suddenly a hand gets put on the back of Akane's shoulder, right? And it suddenly, like, calms her down all of a sudden. As we see Master Urara enters the room, and she just says, like, oh, what are you doing? I'm not usually one for hospital visits, but I didn't expect a whole audience here. Are you putting on a show? Does your Rakugo obsession know no bounds? Come on, try to control yourself. As we see that she's sort of directing all of this over towards Isho, as Akane's like, oh, Master Urara, what are you doing here, right? Or no, I'm sorry, she was directing that at Akane. I don't know why she said she was directing that at Isho, my bad. But Urara then looks at Isho and just says, like, oh, look at that. A familiar face appears. I'm sure you're feeling very unsettled. You were the old Shiguma's children, so seeing your counterpart like this has to deeply affect you. As Isho just sort of laughs a little bit and just exits the room as this is going on, right? And as he leaves the room, Urara just makes note of, you haven't lost that cold edge. As eventually we see that Giriko ends up walking into the room, and it seems like Akane explains the whole pretty much situation to him. As Giriko's just like, what do you mean they're dismantling this Shiguma school like the Guardians? Like, what do you mean by all of this? This is crazy. Like, this is exactly the time where we should be sitting down and supporting our master. And they want us to do what? And, of course, in the room is Urara, and she sort of laughs a little bit at this, just saying, like, hey, like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. It's just, you seem so clueless. Like, how very dense are both of you? Like, let me ask you, what would Shigema currently think? Should his own apprentices be forced to waste valuable learning time on account of his troubles, or should the ongoing instruction he built for them be continued in his absence? Which of these opinions do you think demonstrates proper Kitabataraki? And at this moment, she just suddenly leaves Giriko and Akane alone, as Giriko's like, damn it, there's nothing we can do at all. And as all this happens, we then see that Akane suddenly runs outside and follows Master Urara, who's of course like getting ready to get in her car at this moment, and suddenly just like runs up to her, and Urara is just like, hey, what's going on? And Akane just says like, hey, what you said earlier, what did you mean when you said old Shigema's children and counterpart, right? As Urara's just like, hey, that's really none of your business, that has to do with them, right? As Akane just says like, hey, you've known my master for a long time, haven't you? And Urara's like, come on, don't push it, Akane. But Akane just says, master, he taught me Shigema's art. I don't really want to invade people's privacy by digging into their past, but there's still so much I don't know. At this rate, I can't reform Kitabarataki for master because I don't know what would be best for him. Please, you have to tell me, what did the previous Shigema mean to them? As we see that she suddenly takes a picture, or she's holding a picture in her hand, and the picture she's holding is one she found in Shigema's room not too long ago. I mean, it was last chapter whenever she found it, which is, of course, the picture where we saw a young Shigema and a young Isho, both in the arms of their presumed old Shigema master. And that is where we end this chapter of Akane-banashi. This was just a awesome chapter through and through. Just seeing this, like, discussion between Mikaru and Iken, and then eventually seeing Urara show up in this situation to sort of make Isho go away in a way, and then at this very end of this chapter, just a whole idea of like, oh hey, look at this, it now looks like Akane may be going to Urara for some sort of lore dump of some kind. I really like what we are definitely getting here, and it's definitely a good way to start building up more suspense. But with that, let's move on to the final chapter of today. Let me actually reload my page because my page was not loaded correctly, but alright, here we are, and it's finally time to talk about the final chapter today, and this is none other than Witch Watch, chapter number 176. This chapter is titled, A Cat and Wolf's Waltz. So we open up this chapter at Nimu's house, where we see Nimu's mother is almost looking very, very demonic, as she is petting the family's cat, just like, oh, Giuliano, you're so stinking cute, I could eat you up right now, right? And Nimu's like, hey mom, you are looking very, very scary now. And she's like, hey, we've had Giuliano now for many, many years, and you still spend hours a day just nuzzling his face, right? Pretty much as all of this is going on, the mom just says like, hey, I'll give you plenty of nuzzles too, Nimu, right? And she's like, hey, geez, your love is awfully intense. And hey, I'm not a cat, I'm your daughter. But at this point, Nimu just suddenly thinks like, well, come to think of it, while I told everybody at the Otogi house I'm a shapeshifter, I never once mentioned that I was this stray cat that used to visit them, right? And she just says, like, I never found the right moment for it. And she just thinks, like, hey, and thanks to that, my deal with Wolf is still ongoing. Of course, the deal with Wolf to let him out every single month or so, to pretty much let Wolf do whatever he wants to do. And in this moment, she just thinks like, hey, okay, it's time I fix that. Today, I will finally tell them, hey, I'll go and visit them right now even. And she just thinks like, hey, does it really even matter anymore? And she's like, hey, it's been forever since I last visited them as a cat. Like, what are they going to think about all of this, right? And she just remembers all the time when like Morito petted her and gave her a bath and all of that sort of stuff, right? As Nimu's just like, damn it, like I lounge around the house so many times, like it's just going to be so weird if I don't tell him now, right? And she just thinks like, golly, like what am I supposed to do? As we see the cat finally appears over at the Otogi household, as we just see that Nimu did not walk in normally, she just came in as the cat, right? We see that most of the guys are sitting around in the living room. We see that Morito is on the couch, and we see that a young Nico, Kan, and Keigo are all just sort of lounging around on the floor right next to the coffee table, right? everybody's like, oh, look at that, it's a kitty cat, right? And Morito's like, wow, it's certainly been a while. As, of course, Nico does not know the context, being that she is still very young. She's like, ooh, a kitty, like, what do we do with this kitty, right? And as Morito just explains, like, hey, it used to come around a lot, and it really liked you too, right? And he's like, hey, I even gave it a bath once. And at this point, Nico picks up the cat, just, like, nuzzles its face, right? Of course, and Nimu's like, geez, like, when did you become this big, Nico? Like, you're really growing up. Like, it's touching how much effort everybody is putting into this, right? As we then see that Nimu does her whole little thing of creating a short poem or like a verse of a song or something during this moment. It's just called Grown Up Before You Know It, Into Light by Nimu. It's not really that important. It's just one of like Nimu's jokes in the series almost, is that she just sort of composes this sort of ideas every so often, right? Sorry about that. Sorry about that noise. I'm playing with my computer charging cable because as much as it's fun to talk about manga, I normally like just mess with a lot of things in my hand, and I just dropped my computer cable on my table, and it made the dent, so sorry about that noise there, right? But Nimu just thinks like, hey, like, oh no, I just made a quick verse, but like, hey, that's not what I came here today. I thought really hard about how to do this, and should I start as myself and turn into a cat, or should I show up as a cat and then turn into myself? In the end, I decided to make it a surprise and go from cat to person. But she's just thinking, but wait a second, when is the right point for me to shift back to my human self, right? As Nimu just thinks like, damn it, like, I hate how I did this, like, I just thought it'd be a fun idea, but I didn't come in here with a plan, like, I feel really, really stupid in this moment, right? At this moment, Morito gets up like, hey, kitty, since it's been a while, how about I brush you? Nimu's like, no, don't do that. She sort of just like hisses at Morito. And at this moment, Morito's just like, oh yeah, that's right, for some reason it suddenly decided it didn't like me. Like, I still don't understand why then, right? And we see that Keigo goes over, or no, we see that Kanchi goes over, sits in the chair with a cat, and just like, hey, come on, Morito, it's a cat. Animals don't really get feelings, isn't that right, kitty, right? And Nimu just like screeches again, just like, no, get away from me, right? Get away from me. And Zora starts to run away, but Keigo comes over and just picks up Nimu, as Nimu just thinks like, oh, look at this, it's Keigo, and he's really up close too, right? And she just like takes a note of all of Keigo's features and just thinks like, wow, just look at him, right? And we see that Morito's like, hey, I thought you didn't like cats, Keigo, right? And Keigo's like, yeah, I mean, I don't really like him, but I do sort of like this one though, right? As he sort of just goes and just starts to pet Nimu a little bit, right? And Nimu's just like, oh gosh, I can't take this anymore, and starts to like wiggle out of Keigo's blast, as pretty much Nimu starts to fall out and fall to the ground, not being a very good cat, because it looks like she's going to hit the ground back first, which is like, that's not how cats work. But in this moment, Keigo jumps onto the ground and goes all the way down and catches Nimu right before she hits the ground into cat form. And it pretty much is that Keigo almost gives this cat a kiss in trying to save it, right? Nimu and everybody's like, what the fuck did you just do, Keigo? Like, what in the world happened here? Keigo just is like, whoo, good thing I didn't crush the cat and everything, right? And everybody's just like, oh no, like, did you just kiss the cat? Like, what's going on here? As Nimu sort of starts to run off a little bit, right? And Keigo's like, don't worry, I mean, I didn't kiss the cat, that's stupid. I mean, can a human and a cat really even kiss? Nimu aways is like, damn it, we kissed, like, what in the world is going on here? It now seems like time has progressed a little bit. As all this is going on, Nimu is still hanging around the household, but is now just sort of sitting on the couch, right? And we see that Nico is just very interested in the cat as everything goes. We see inside Nimu's mind where she's just thinking like, oh my gosh, we kissed, like it was almost like mouth to mouth, like what in the world is going on? She's like, but I'm a cat right now, and Keigo doesn't realize he just kissed a girl either, so it doesn't count, like it doesn't count at all, it doesn't count at all, right? And Nimu just thinks like, wait a second, the reason I came here today was to reveal to everybody that I was the cat. But I can't do that now, being like, oh no, this is so bad, right? And as all this is going on, she just starts to sort of flop around on the couch and sleep some more, and just like really internalizing all of this going on. And as she eventually flops around, she eventually lays on the couch in a way to where her back is sort of arched, and she lays in the size of a crescent, pretty much, right? Of course, Keigo sees this, and being how it works, he suddenly turns into Wolf, right? And everybody's like, damn it, what the hell? Why did you transform, right? As I love Morito's like, Jesus Christ, Wolf, you fucking surprised me. What in the world's going on here, right? And I love how, out of everybody, Nimue is the one who is so unfazed by this, as she sort of looks over and like, oh, it looks like the kitty was laying, like a crescent on the couch, right? And as all of this happens, Nimue just like, oh, what? It looks like Wolf came out, right? And she just thinks like, oh yeah, he's the other one I have feelings for. Even though they're technically the same person, she's like, oh gosh, it is so complicated, right? Keigo goes over and just notices it's Nimue and is like, oh, yo, cat, it's been a while, right? As he just sort of comes over and just says like, hey, it's been a real long time. I wonder why that is, huh? Like, what's going on here, right? And Khan's like, Wolf, are you trying to pick a fight with the cat there, right? And Morito just thinks like, well, now that you say it, it seems like that cat is sort of decently attached to Wolf, right? As Wolf just thinks like, hey, my transformation was a total coincidence and she didn't do it on purpose. That means she's here from some other reason than to strictly let me out. Why come as a cat though, right? As we suddenly see that Wolf puts two and two together, picks up Nimue and just says like, oh, so you're here to definitely show your true identity today, aren't you, right? And he's like, but now you're too self-conscious after that whole pseudo-kiss thing whenever we fell over, right? And Nimue just sort of looks away from Wolf, as Wolf suddenly takes the cat, brings it in closer, and gives the cat a kiss of his own volition, right? As he just sort of laughs a bit like, huh, look at that. And of course, Nimue just starts to freak out some more and completely scratches up Wolf's face and then just hops off and runs completely away, sort of looking at Wolf and sort of how Wolf took advantage of her in a way here, right? Nico's like, oh no, the kitty ran away, oh no, 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 right? And Morito's like, what the hell did you just do, Wolf, right? And Wolf's just like, hey, I thought I'd make a snack of it, but it ran away instead, right? And at this point, Wolf just thinks like, well, it wasn't anything too big, quit overreacting. As we suddenly cut to later, where we see that Keigo is now back in his own body, as we see the time that Wolf has to sort of like, went away during all of that time, right? As Keigo's like, damn it, like, what in the world did Wolf do to me? And like, why do I have scratch marks on my face? Like, come on, what is this, right? As he eventually looks over and checks his phone, where we see that Wolf had left him a note, and it just says like, hey, how come I was the only one who got scratched, right? As we see that, of course, Keigo's like, I don't get it. Why is Wolf mad at me for, right? Because, of course, Wolf understands that, like, hey, Nimue is who Nimue is. Nimue's the cat and all that sort of deal. And why was it that whenever Wolf kissed the cat, he was the one who got scratched and that Keigo wasn't? It was a fun little cute chapter, sort of in a typical Witch Watch fashion. It takes a while to get through, like, all of the denseness and the chapter stuff going on with it, but I enjoyed the chapter very much. And yeah, that is all of the chapters this week, which is a little shocking, all things considered, but sort of is what it is there. Alright, and with that, now let's head over to the, I guess, arguably the most interesting part of the video. Let me open up OBS here, and let's get started on the recording. Let's see here. Alright, it looks like we are now currently recording. As you see here is the issue 47 of 2024, all of the various manga I read this week. And like I said, this week I actually went and talked about, let's see, 17, so that'd be 15 series, all things considered. And like I said, I only talked about 6 of them, but as I mentioned, I talked about the 6 that I definitely enjoyed the best here. As we see, my favorite chapter was Ruri Dragon, followed by Akane-banashi, Ichi the Witch, Witch Watch, One Piece, and Akane-banashi. Pretty much, I talked about all of the chapters in, like, that top 6 of what I really enjoyed this week. Of course, didn't talk about Akane-banashi since I do my own video of that on the side, so go check out my Akane-banashi chapter number 54 review. Like I mentioned, I'm recording this on Friday, November 15th of 2024, and that was actually the video that I put up today, was my Akane-banashi chapter number 54 review, right? Then looking at the rest of it, like Undead Unlock, Hunter x Hunter, Elusive Samurai, Blue Box, Hematin. Like we said, Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi is at number 14th. I've re-looked through the chapters, and I don't think I'm going to change that score at all. I just think that Kiyoshi was a fun chapter to talk about, all things considered. Then going into Astro Royale, Kill Blue, and Shinobi Undercover as the worst chapter of the week. I think I'm willing to give Shinobi Undercover 1 to 2 more chapters, and if I'm not really rocking with it, I think I may just outright drop it. I do enjoy the story, and I do like Yodaka as a main character, but it's just not been my favorite series to really talk about ever since, or even to read, since those like first 2 chapters that I decently enjoyed. Same thing with Kill Blue. Depending on where the story goes on from here, I could definitely foresee a future where I end up dropping it. And then coming down to the character of the week, it definitely had to be Nimue from Witch Watch. I just really loved her character through and through. Like, going through all the characters like Ruri Dragon, Ruri had that extremely cool moment. Kagurabachi, there wasn't really any one character that was focused on in this Kagurabachi chapter besides for like the lore drop based on the Hashaku that Hirohiko gave us. Ichi the Witch, Ichi looked awesome as could be, and I was sort of debating on giving it to Kumagi, but I just really love Nimue, and I think that was just a really fun chapter, all things considered. Moving into Witch Watch, Nimue. One Piece, I don't think I can give it to Loki yet, even though it was like a really cool moment, like seeing Elbaf and just seeing that moment. I just don't think that Loki has earned it yet, and I think he's going to earn it in due time. Eventually going on to Akane-banashi, I don't think there was a really standout character there. And then just looking at the other series, like, they were good, but I don't think there was a specific best character from them, besides for Nimue this week, right? But yeah, good issue, all things considered, and that is, of course, the rankings. So for that, let me pause the recording here. We're going to stop recording. Yes, please. All right, that's how that works. But yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching this mini episode of Let's Talk About Weekly Shonen Jump here again today. Hopefully you guys are enjoying these mini episodes. I don't know about the next few issues. I may try to do at least a mini episode. I may try to get out an episode every week for these Weekly Shonen Jump videos. A mini episodes for the weeks I don't find as interesting. And then hopefully after I get caught up, I can start doing more full episodes again of like, hey, let me talk about every single, all 15 series here. But yeah, definitely good weekend jump for sure. Can't really complain. But yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching. Like I said, I've got plenty of other times I've talked about Weekly Shonen Jump on the channel. Again, I don't really have too many from this year of 2024, but I have about 15 from 2023, and I'm working on getting caught up with all of the 2024 ones right here, because reading manga, I think, is one of the best hobbies anybody can have. So if I'm reading it, why not talk about it, right? But I do plenty of other anime and manga related content on the channel. Like I alluded to earlier, the final chapter of Oshinoko has recently come out, so I have it. I did my final video on that, and it is currently up on the channel. If you guys have made it this far and enjoyed the way I do my reviews, and especially my more long form reviews, where instead of focusing 10 minutes on a chapter, I spend upwards of 30 on a single chapter talking about it. I need a new recommendation for a series that will take over Oshinoko's place, because as much as I love Oshinoko, it's sort of over, so I can't really talk about it anymore, and I would prefer if it's a series that doesn't run in Weekly Shonen Jump, because I sort of talked about all the Weekly Shonen Jump series here, and I already do Kagurabachi videos, so I'm sort of looking for something that's not in this realm of, like, Shonen Jump, and also it's not a battle manga, because I love talking about battle manga, but only one at a time, please, right? But yeah, with that, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Weekly Shonen Jump, this mini episode on issue number 47 of 2024. And yeah, I will catch you guys next time. I think we talked about a great 3 chapters today. Really, I love the moment with Loki and Elbaf. I love the moment where Ruri calls down the lightning from the sky. Definitely worthy of my chapter of the week. And then, like, the whole title drop in Ichi the Witch was amazing. Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi was good. Akane-banashi and Witch Watch were also very interesting, but not like the best end-all be-all. But yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching the video today, and I will catch you guys next time with presumably issue number 48 of 2024. I'll catch you guys then. Thank you guys so very much for watching. This will be Glowplasma 231 signing out.